Faith sounds easy until you have to act on it. We love the idea of trusting God until that trust means risking something we value. We want confirmation before commitment, clarity before courage, but real faith doesn't work that way. Jonathan shows us that faith moves first, explanations come later. I'm Dr. Toussaint Williams, and this is Serving Second. I know what it feels like to be overlooked. I know what it feels like to carry the weight of responsibility without sometimes getting that recognition. That's why this space exists, to equip second chair leaders to thrive right where God has placed you. Today, we're going to talk about Jonathan in 1 Samuel chapter 14. We're going to see how his trust in God made him fearless, even when odds and the terrain and even logic were against him. We're going to learn that serving second requires faith that fights. That's right, faith that fights. Courage, courage rooted not in the title or position, but in a confidence in God. This is an understanding that there is a higher power, a greater power that helps us fight even when it looks like all odds are against us. You've been there. You face moments where the odds were against you, when logic says stay put, but conviction says to move. Maybe you had a sense that God was calling you to act, but you couldn't see how it was going to end. Jonathan felt that tension. He looked at impossible odds and said, perhaps God's going to act on our behalf. Nothing can hinder the Lord from saving by many or by few. This is a reminder that serving second isn't for the weak. It's for people who trust God enough to move when no one else will. His name was Charles Young, Colonel Charles Young. He knew something about moving forward when the path wasn't clear. Born in 1864 to formerly enslaved parents, he became the third African American to graduate from West Point. He rose through the ranks of the U.S. Army to troops known as the Buffalo Soldiers, men who often faced discrimination at home while serving their country abroad. Young led with quiet strength, intelligence, and faith. He took care of his soldiers, fought for their dignity, and modeled integrity even under pressure. Like Jonathan, he believed that courage wasn't about rank, it was about responsibility. He recognized that leadership wasn't about the title, it was about trust. We see that in our story, where in 1 Samuel chapter 14, Israel's army is stuck. The Philistines, like they always do, seems to have the advantage. Better weapons, they have higher ground, they even have stronger numbers. And it's almost like all the enemies always have that idea. But said, Saul sits under a pomegranate tree, surrounded by soldiers who are afraid to move. Jonathan's dad, the leader, should have been fighting, but his dad, the people that should be on his side, didn't want to or were afraid to move forward. But Jonathan looks at his young armor bearer and decides to act. Verse 6 of 1 Samuel 14 says, "Come, let's go over to the outposts of these uncircumcised men. Perhaps the Lord will act on our behalf." That one line tells us everything we need to know about Jonathan's faith. And let me say this to our serving second leaders: just because you aren't the first person in charge doesn't mean God does not equip you with leadership skills and gifts. In fact, you're going to be the one that's going to initiate action. You're going to be the one that's going to be the one on the front lines of activity. And God allows these things to occur to sometimes push the organization, to sometimes push your coworkers, your individuals that you're working with. He sometimes allows these things to occur for you to be the catalyst for change. Now, it's interesting to note that Jonathan didn't have certainty. He had confidence in God. And here's the unique challenge: Jonathan didn't have to fight. He was the king's son. He had every excuse not to have to deal with this. He was the heir to the throne. He could have waited safely until someone took initiative. But he probably just like you and a lot of times like me, couldn't stay still when he saw an opportunity for God to show his power. And family, that's a great definition of faith. It moves when other people want to pause. It risks reputation for revelation. Jonathan didn't ask for permission, didn't raise his hand and say, "Can somebody send me?" He didn't send a message home. He didn't even tell his father Saul. Faith doesn't always wait for consensus, it responds to conviction. Some of you may be saying, "Hey, listen, Toussaint, I hear you, but I have some constraints. I can't always move the way I want to." And it's imperative for you to be sensitive to what God is doing in your life because you never know that thing that is itching you, that thing that keeps on grinding your gears, that could be the thing that God is convicting you to move on where no one else sees it. Notice in verse 4, Jonathan climbs between two sharp cliffs to reach the Philistine camp. He had no backup, no high ground, and no guarantee. Leadership is not easy. For Jonathan, and just like us, it's going to require effort. The way is not going to be smooth. There may not be a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This there may not be a list of things to do. In this thing called leadership, we sometimes have to act without there being a roadmap. And for Jonathan, every natural factor said, this is not a good idea. But Jonathan knew something I want to remind you because I often sometimes forget. Faith does not require perfect circumstances. It requires trusting a perfect God. The battle plan looked terrible on paper, but God specializes in impossible math. He can save, like Jonathan said, by many or by few. God doesn't need a whole lot of people. He simply needs one willing person. Jonathan's leadership makes this story so remarkable because it's not just what he did, it's how he led. Jonathan wasn't operating by himself. And I want to encourage you as a second chair leader to have people around you that you are growing with you. Have a mentee that you are working with. Have somebody on your team that you can groom, that you see leadership potential in. And Jonathan does this. Jonathan, working with his armor bearer, does not command him to follow him. He gives him an invitation. And this is so critical. So many times people see leadership as an individual that says, do this or do that. And they're leading based on, or they're commanding based on position, that idea of positional authority. That's not true, authentic leadership. Well, let me say this. That is leadership, but that's not the best way, especially for a second chair leader. You see, Jonathan doesn't command his armor bearer to follow. He invites him. Come, he says, let's go over. Now that's leadership rooted in respect and not rank. And notice the armor bearer's response. It tells a lot about their relationship. The armor bearer says, do all that is in your heart. I am with you, heart and soul. Now, that kind of loyalty isn't forced, that's earned. That's an individual that says, I've seen you do things I don't see other people doing. That individual says, I've seen you make sacrifices I don't see other people making. And while the entire nation is just chilling, while his dad and other soldiers, individuals who are paid and trained to fight, while everybody else is doing their own thing, Jonathan has a win in leadership, and it's only one individual. But notice how this relationship changes, yeah, I even say saves a nation from danger and destruction. Jonathan's faith in God inspired faith in the one serving under him. So here's your lesson. People follow conviction before they follow position. So verse 11 says, so both of them showed themselves to the Philistine outpost. They stepped into visibility, into enemy territory, vulnerable, exposed, outnumbered, but they move anyway. Faith does not hide in the shadows, it climbs when others stay comfortable. Faith says, I'm going to put myself out there and I'm going to watch what God does. And as they ascend, Jonathan says this in verse 12, climb up after me. The Lord has given them into the hand of Israel. Notice how Jonathan goes up first. He makes himself vulnerable before he sends someone else. He allows himself to possibly take the hit before anybody on his team does. And notice how this works out for him. Jonathan doesn't send others where he's unwilling to go. We talked earlier about Colonel Young. Character inspires trust. Jonathan understood that leadership isn't about giving orders, it's about setting an example. Colonel Young led soldiers through harsh conditions in foreign lands. They followed him because he cared for them. He protected them. He saw them. Jonathan's armor bearer felt the exact same way. He trusted Jonathan because Jonathan trusted in God. Get this, family. Leaders who truly believe in God inspire the same courage in others. Faith multiplies through example. So here are your lessons. Faith precedes strategy. Jonathan didn't wait for confirmation. He created it. God didn't reveal victory until after Jonathan climbed up the precipice. You can't steer a parked life. You can't build momentum by standing still. Sometimes you have to move first, trusting God will meet you on the climb. Lesson number 2. Leadership lifts others. Jonathan's first words to his armor bearer weren't commands. They were invitations. Come with me, he said. In doing so, he included the man beneath him in the mission beside him. I found in my journey in leadership, this is the best way to inspire people over a long period of time. You can always give commands to a subordinate, and they'll listen for a while, but as soon as you turn your back, they're gone or they're doing something else. But what happens in this story, Jonathan reveals what it really means to serve second. Jonathan shows that leadership isn't about yelling at others because you're in a specific position. Jonathan included the man beneath him in the mission beside him. And that's the definition of servant leadership. When you elevate those who serve you, you create a culture of courage. We see the armor bearer wasn't protecting a prince, he was partnering with a fellow believer. Jonathan shows us the people under your care should feel covered and not crushed. Lesson number 3. Faith inspires faith. The armor bearer's courage was a mirror of Jonathan's faith. When you lead from belief, others follow your confidence until they find their own. And that's why integrity matters so much. People can't trust a leader who doesn't trust God. Jonathan's conviction transferred courage to the next man. And that's what I love about this journey, that as we're serving second, it inspires other people to follow our example. And if we're trusting in a higher power, that gives them strength, that gives them courage to move forward as well. Last lesson number 4. Jonathan's actions were never about his reputation. Even after this victory, like many before, God didn't make him king. Jonathan had faith in God. In fact, you remember we talked about God was looking after a man after his own heart, and God chose David instead of Jonathan. But that did not stop Jonathan in trusting in God. Jonathan didn't get upset, or Jonathan didn't posture himself and say, if I do this, then God will change the situation. No, Jonathan was committed to serving no matter what God did. Jonathan was committed to trusting God no matter what was going on. He understood that success isn't always about the throne, it's about obedience. Faith that serves brings more honor than ambition that shines. Character sustains what calling starts. Notice the last part of this story, found in verse 12. Jonathan says to his armor bearer, "Climb up after me. The Lord has given them into the hand of Israel." Together they climbed, together they fought, and together they won. Their victory, just the two guys, sparked chaos in the Philistine camp and shifted the momentum for the entire nation. All because two men decided to trust in God more than their numbers. Faith under fire changed a nation. I don't know what you're experiencing or what journey God has called you in or what faith steps you need to make, but I want to encourage you to take them. Remember Charles Young? He once wrote, "The army is my home, and my duty is my guiding star." He believed in honor, service, and faithfulness even when recognition was slow. Like Jonathan, he showed that courage and compassion can coexist. Leadership isn't just strength, it's stewardship. Whether in the field or in faith, strong leaders fight for the people under them, not just for the goals ahead of them. So, here are your action steps for this week. Number one, you got to move first. What area in your life have you been waiting for a guarantee? This is your sign. Stop waiting. Start climbing. Action step number two, lift someone else up. Find somebody under your influence who needs courage. I need you to encourage them and let them know you're with them. Because remember, faith shared is faith multiplied. Family, I just want to let you know this has been special. And my prayer for you today is that you will learn from Jonathan's example. His journey of faith occurred before he saw a miracle. Because I want to remind you, there are other people out there just like you, people who are serving second, just like Colonel Charles Young, who modeled courage and humility and care and fought for those people who he served with. Our prayer is that we ask God to teach us how to move when he says go, and to protect those who follow us, and we can so that we can trust that he can save by many or by few. Family, Jonathan teaches us that faith moves before certainty. We realized by today's lesson that true leaders climb first and bring others with them, and God can do great things with small numbers and willing hearts. So this week, I need you to move first, and I need you to lift others, and most importantly, trust God with the outcome. So I need you, you've been with us this long, so I need you to help me out. Subscribe on YouTube, follow on Instagram at Serving Second, and this is our covenant statement. This is the mantra that we have at Serving Second, that the mission I serve is bigger than my title. Mission I serve is bigger than my title. Family, this is the Serving Second podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Toussaint Williams, where serving chair leaders create first place outcomes. Lead well, lead strong, and I'll see you next week. God bless.